Chris, how's it going?
Excellent. How are you?
Great. Thanks for taking a little bit of time to have a conversation that I think is on the top of everybody's mind. You and I work with a lot of clients together, and one of the things that just keeps coming up, even in just discovery calls, which I know you do with people as well, is just like how much does it cost? How much money do I need to go get from a bank? And I thought we'd have a quick conversation about it. I do a lot of blog writing. You do amazing video content. So I thought it would be cool if we sort of combined forces and just did a short little video together. So one of the first things that kind of comes up when I'm working with clients, and I think you handle it similarly, is just sort of talking about like the main buckets of cash, right? Like there's just going to kind of be these like briefcases of cash that need to get handed over. What do those look like on your end from the side of developing the gym and developing the actual physical space?
Hmm. Yeah. So I look at it as that bucket, however big it is
Yeah.
the biggest bucket because
Yeah, for sure.
you need to build the thing out. And so, just like running up a credit card or taking on too much debt, like it lives with you for a very long time. And so, the answer really is like that bucket has to be the right size, whether that's tiny or gigantic for how you see running the business. And that's
Yeah.
why almost every answer in my world is it depends because as you've heard me say many times, because it really does on
Yeah.
like where, the market to a degree, but how the business is going to be run. Because, and how are you modeling it? Are you, just as a quick example, some people I talk to, it's all kids, no kids, some kids, like
Right.
that one thing alone has a huge impact on the space planning, on the business model, on all of it. And so, and then now, there's a lot of the facilities, I think, have a lot more hybrid aspects as well, whether that's with how much of a focus is on fitness or training, or like these models that I don't think at all fall into sort of traditional, like here's the demographics equals this many square feet of climbing equals this many, like that is absolutely not how I see it really working, because you're not really competing with climbing only. You're competing with any other way people can spend time and money.
Wallet share.
Or just sitting at home and doing that.
Yeah. I mean, wallet share is what I talk to clients about. It's like when, excuse me, when you do a competitive analysis, it's like, of course you want to look at other climbing gyms, but
yeah,
what about F45 or Soul Cycle or Chuck E. Cheese if you're going to go hard in the paint with youth programs? Like, well, how are you looking at, daycare centers if you're going to be doing summer camps, all the places where it's like people are making consumer choices, right? Yeah.
I look at that exact thing as like it's like using like the stars to triangulate yourself.
Yeah,
like
totally.
they all matter, but you can't rely on one of them. You have to sort of use all the data points. And so many of the data points that matter or that we should pay more attention to are based on like the client's vision. So like, who cares? Like the kids may not matter much if you don't want kids, like, or vice versa. So like they're all sort of these points that we use to triangulate, like in this sort of ocean of building development in my world.
Yeah, I had a conversation just yesterday actually with a climbing wall manufacturer, and they were sort of saying, man, I hate giving people a per square footage like estimate up front. And they're like, everybody wants it because they're doing their modeling, and I just hate it because it can bite me later, because it's very hard to know when you don't have a design yet. You don't understand the engineering needs. You don't understand the building. Yeah, here's how much your climbing wall is going to cost on a per square footage basis, And he was like, we can get close-ish, but we could also be completely way off depending on by the time you get to construction, what are the cost of materials and all that stuff. So do you do the same on your end as well for all the GC stuff, I imagine?
I mean, I would say multiples more than what they were describing, because absolutely, because if you take, I just finished a project a couple months ago that the build out was less than $100 a square foot blended, because the building itself was like in decent shape.
And that's including climbing wall flooring?
This was a different project, but without getting into the details too much, it's like it's like a largish facility, like sort of medium large.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it didn't have a lot of heavy lifting to do, really. It was more about like cleaning and putting in your stuff versus like some of the stuff you and I've done where we rip the roof off and build effectively a new building.
Yeah.
Which today is significantly more expensive. So, you know, it can go from, say, just $100, which is hard to build anything for $100 today or renovate, all the way up to $400. So like we're talking many multiples different. So to your comment, it's absolutely hard to do it. But when I hear architects talk about, well, we can't really get pricing yet because we don't have the drawings and things like that, it truly is a chicken and egg thing, because you can't have an actual cost of something without that stuff. But we have to be able to estimate it early, because otherwise you really want to spend the time and money. So goes into wasting time and money. Yeah. You really want to spend all this time and money basically just driving 100 miles an hour in a direction that you don't know if it's even going to work. Like 30, 50, $80,000, 6 months, 9 months, and then just go, oh man, like almost back to zero, maybe back to, 30%. Yeah. Because you effectively have to sometimes like lop an arm off of the thing. Like it's not just making it smaller. You need to like restructure. Yeah. And so we have to be able, in my world, and I think that this isn't me saying this, this is how, this is a developer mindset of, we have to be able to throw some numbers out there. Mm-hmm. And the client cannot assume that they're fact until we actually have better information. And frankly, even then they're not really fact, because things come up. Right. So the point is like, you have to have the right mindset for this, where we can't like hold people over the coals for making early estimates if they're reasonable estimates. Right. But we have to be able to start somewhere.
Yeah, totally. There's, I think in the early development phases that you and I work in a lot with clients, there's so much chicken and egg stuff. Real estate is a great example. And I think that's one of the buckets of cash that we want people to be thinking about is, you've got to go spend money on a broker if that's what you need to do. You might need to make deposits, and you may need to be hiring a legal counsel to review LOIs and things like that, But a lot of times, like I have clients that are like, well, I haven't exactly found locations yet because I'm going and looking at locations, and the broker's going, oh, you don't have any money yet? You don't have a project? Like, come back to me when you have a project. But then people are going to the bank to get funded or to investors, and they're like, you don't have a location yet? Like, come back to me when you have a location. So there's a lot of sort of chicken and egg stuff that goes on in this early phase.
And even to that point, like, what are you even looking for? Like, are you looking for a lot of the one of the big ones is, are you looking for land or a building to either buy or renovate or lease? And how do you have any idea without some sort of numbers, like even at a very high level, what that requires? Because even if it works as a business, like emotionally, do you want to go find that much money? Like, right. Yeah. Or is your goal to open something within the next 12 months? Yeah. Because that in and of itself has nothing to do with numbers necessarily. It's a timeline issue. Yeah. But it completely affects everything else.
Yeah. And so, I mean, money can speed stuff up to a degree, but there's
to a degree. Like it is
at some point, no matter how much money you throw at it, it's going to move at a certain pace. But money can help to a point, but that's about it.
But the difference between finding a building that exists and finding land is not something that spending more money speeds up enough. It's like those are years different probably in terms of time. So maybe you can shave off a little bit or optimize it and spend, work nights and whatever. And there's different ways we can do this. And this is a huge part of conversations is effectively what we're talking about is getting open sooner. Because no matter what you do, that would be good. Yeah. So how can we streamline the documentation and then construction? Because in my mind, that is sort of the major steps. It goes from zero, which is a lot of sweat equity, to some investment with, you listed a bunch of people, folks like yourself and myself. The next big jump is if that becomes something that's the boiling is sort of at a point where you're ready to invest. The next jump is like, say 10% of the project costs, say 7 to 10% for soft costs. Sure. Like that starts to build pretty quickly. For a $1 million project, which is cheap, that could be $100,000. So like it goes up very quickly, right? $1 million project in my world is cheap. So like you're spending multiple six figures probably.
Yep.
You're committing to that. Maybe it doesn't go all out the door right away, but the point is like all of a sudden the hook is set and you're ramping, and then you do another like a 10x on that to build the thing.
Yeah, it seems like once
the milestones.
It seems like once the money faucet turns on, like if folks are working with you and I, they're paying us like at the end of the day, it's pretty small fees compared to the total cost of their project.
Probably like 1 or 2%.
Yeah, max, right?
Max.
And it's like, but then what you're saying is like the money faucet kind of turns on pretty quick, and like
you better be ready with your pen and your checkbook.
Yeah, and it like opens up fast. It doesn't like go trickle. It goes, like you said, 10% to like 70% of the project cost. So one of the things I wanted to quickly mention is we're talking about like what the heck does it cost? It is the fundraising portion. And I think this is a big thing that people not like underestimate, but maybe like misestimate, is like how tricky fundraising can be and how much it can sort of cost you, in the sense that it's really hard to like just go get an SBA loan, right? They're usually going to want 10 to 20% equity in. So again, if you're looking at 1 million would be a cheap project, you need six figures walking in the door of that bank, right? Somehow. So the question is, do you go do a friends and family round ahead of time to get that six figures? Do you have your own nest egg? And a lot of people sort of
house.
Houses.
It's high stakes.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people, I think, sort of misestimate. I don't know if they underestimate, but they sort of misestimate it. And then I think the other thing that people don't think about is a lot of lenders, if you're doing debt financing, will also require that whole loan amount is collateralized in some way.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So like if you want to go get a $1 million loan, like, do you have some asset or some way of collateralizing, basically putting a PG, right, a personal guarantee on that loan? You probably won't run into that if you're doing investors and you're giving away equity, but a lot of debt finance will do that. So I think another big thought as it relates to cash is like, do you have any upfront cash or equity to put into your loan? Most lenders, again, not investors, lenders are probably going to look for 10 to 20%, just like getting a mortgage or whatever, right? It's like 10 to 20%. And then the other one I think is like the building itself and the land, like you mentioned, which I think is a huge amount. And then the renovation and sort of the GC work, like let's exclude climbing wall stuff, is kind of the other bucket. And I really like the point that you made about, the state of the building really affects like to the 300%, 1 to 300% swing based on the, how clean of a white shell do you get, and is all the plumbing stub out where you need it? Do you have to rip stuff down and all of those things? And then there's the walls and flooring. We kind of mentioned that. And, I think those continue to get more expensive, even on the projects that we did together in our past. And then the ones we're working on together with clients now, like the cost difference is pretty wild over the last decade. And then I think that's when you start sort of meshing into more of the work that I do with operations, and you start thinking about, well, what about FF&E, right? Fitness equipment, all of your furniture, blah, blah, blah. And by the time you add that stuff up, you start getting into six figures, like pretty quick, again, depending on the size of your space and obviously how nice do you want your amenities to be. You're going to get the highest end fitness equipment, you're going to go buy used stuff, etc. But that stuff kind of very quickly adds up. And then what a lot of people that I have seen, at least, don't even really start to think about until almost too late in the game is all the operational setup, including staffing runway. Like payroll runway is another huge chunk. Like, are you going to hire a marketing coordinator early on, your route setting team, your general manager, et cetera? Like all of this can easily, if you look 3 to 6 months out from opening, can be another six figures pretty quickly. And then you've got IT, right? Your computers, your iPads, your software licenses, your phone systems, your cameras and security, if you're going to do that. So, I mean, we're talking about really big buckets by the time you get into office supplies, climbing holds and setting equipment. This is all very expensive. And so I think the message that we're conveying is these things are not cheap to open, right? Even if you're doing a small 5,000 square foot, bouldering gym without a ton of crazy amenities, there's no saunas and like fancy locker rooms. These things are still really expensive to open. Is there any place where you see like money being wasted the most, like where it just seems like the cash it's like people are setting duffel bags of cash on fire? Like, is there any spot where that feels like it happens?
Well, just one comment on the real estate part, if you don't mind. So I think this is fundamentally like a real estate issue. And just like a lot of real estate, getting on the ladder sort of helps a lot, because so like getting a business open, the conversations you were describing around debt and collateralizing loans and all that kind of stuff changes a lot when you have a business that's operating successfully, because now that in and of itself is a major asset that people can walk into and look around. And the game from a fundraising point of view, from a debt point of view, from all that, it just is so different that I think there's a lot to be said for just getting on the ladder of opening the business and not being, you know, negligent about it, but doing it well, even if it's, I always say, like, however big the pie is, like once we establish what that is, then we can focus on making that thing amazing. Whether it's big or small, who cares? Because we can make it amazing. And then like all of a sudden now you've got, the wheel is turning, and like, you know, you're assuming you're running it well. And, you know, all of a sudden it's like, it's a lot. I mean, you and I've been through this on the ground doing it. It's a lot easier to raise money standing in a facility looking around than in a coffee shop somewhere with no experience with it. You know,
a spreadsheet and an idea or whatever.
Yeah. And it's like, I know you and I both help with that part too, but the point is that, you know, there's a reasons, I think, for a lot of reasons to just get going. But in that regard, if you're in that position, especially sort of starting, you know, setting buckets of money on fire, to your point, is really bad, right? And what I think is a huge risk is that you're probably, if you're starting, even if you have a lot of money to, like, say earmarked in your bank account for this, I mean, maybe that's like $100,000. That still doesn't get you that far. More likely, you've got like $20,000 or $30,000. If you hire one or two people to do stuff that aren't the right people, you're burning through that. And then you're at a point where you go, do I give it up, or do I get more money? And you're probably thinking like good money after bad. And what I hear from so many people, even people with facilities, I just had this conversation where a lot of times it's like, hey, what do I do, Mr. Realtor person or Mrs. Realtor? Hey, talk to this architect. Okay, so you talk to them and they might give you a proposal for like a $200,000 drawing set or something. And the problem is, very often you need that at some point, but probably not at the start. Because what are they drawing? And so I've seen so many people who've even talked to me. By the time I talk to them, they've invested 1 or 2 years, $30,000 to $50,000, and just kind of are talking to me saying, we haven't gotten anywhere. And my answer is like, yes, you have not gotten very far. You've basically got a drawing of something that is sort of living in a vacuum without gravity. That isn't really even based in you. It's sort of whatever this person wanted to make, who may or may not know what they're doing. And it just is this sort of thing that they don't know how to price. They're, oh, well, that's not my job. It's like, you know, back in the day, architects were way more involved in that stuff. They're just not anymore. So I think the initial decisions are it's not big buckets of money, but it's very valuable buckets of money, because you don't have much to spend. You know, if you're running a business, you might have a sort of discretionary development fund where you can burn cash flying around and visiting sites and hiring consultants, and like you're sort of more willing to burn some cash to get answers. But at the beginning, you probably don't. And so even though it might not be a huge bucket, it's like a more valuable bucket because it's like out of your pocketbook.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of the work that you and I do when we're working with clients is sort of attempting to, as much as it can be done, sort of future-proof some of those bigger buckets of money, right? And make them more executable. One of the places where I see money, and it's not really like money being wasted, it's like just watching opportunity like fly away, is no real version of a good pre-sale plan. And it's like,
you said this,
man, like, you know, I've got a client I just worked with. They've opened a bunch of gyms, and we just put together their first like real strategic pre-sale plan. We increased the last gym that they opened, beat their best pre-sale ever by something like 20x. Like massive improvement. And so when you start to think about what it looks like from a cash generation to start paying down the debt that you've taken on
Day one.
from literally from the day you open your doors, is
the
a
math
huge,
is totally different.
yeah, and it makes a really big difference. I mean, I work with, you know, on P&Ls with clients all the time to go get funded, and it's like, well, let's talk about what your pre-sale plan is. You know, how many members are you going to open with? What's billing look like on day one? Is it $750 or is it $75,000 for your first month? Like, big difference, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily like money wasted as much as like opportunity wasted, that then just creates the tail of success to be like much longer and the ramp up to be much longer.
It's funny the way you said that, because like it's not that that's like low hanging fruit, but it's like relatively accessible.
Yeah.
If you just put some attention into it. And that's sort of what I'm saying too. Like the work I do with numbers, very often it's much more about back of the envelope to start, because if it doesn't work there, we're not going to optimize 2 or 3 or 5% to like a raging success. It's like, no, we have to get like these big chunks, like the foundation, pardon the pun, like get those in place. And then we can like work on extracting more. I've been saying that to people about the pre-sale thing just from conversations with you. Because you're right. I mean, just knowing things we've worked on and seeing clients' performance, it's like, some people are like, oh, we opened with like 100, and some people it's like we opened with 1,000. And you know, it doesn't necessarily have a ton to do with the actual facility. It's just how they approach it. Yeah.
Well, I think that a lot of when you hand clients off to me, what I realize oftentimes is like they've spent so much time in their head thinking about the work that you guys are doing together, and what's my gym going to look like, and how's it going to feel, and how much space am I allocating to fitness, and whatever, all of which are the right questions to be asking. And then all of a sudden they're sort of like, whoa, hang on. I got to actually open this place and run the business. And like, to some degree, it's like getting the gym open is kind of like that the work hasn't started yet. You know, now you got to run the business sustainably going forward, not in any way to belittle the work that you're doing, but it's like that just sort of stops and happens sort of once, for lack of better terms. And then it's like, now you've got whatever, 10, 20, 30 years, you got to kind of run this thing and make it work. So that
if you think about like a restaurant, just in that regard, like, you know, you could have the most amazing room for your restaurant, but if the food and service is horrible, you know, or vice versa, right? Totally. So 100%, you're like, I'm not to belittle myself, but like, I'm creating like I look at it as an instrument to be tuned to be a amazing place to be that is producing for the business. And so that's the DNA of it, has to support that and be flexible to adapt and evolve and whatever. But inevitably, it's the operator who has to tune this thing because otherwise it's just like an instrument that's just sitting there and not doing anything. So I 100% agree.
How do you think people figure all this out? Like if somebody's trying to figure out, and I mean, the answer can't be, you know, hire Gavin and Chris, right? Like how do you figure this out? How do you unpack it? Like what would you say to somebody that's watching this video and is like, I want to open a gym. How much does this cost?
So, you know, as we started, my answer to that is just that it depends. And so I think to answer the question of it depends on what, it depends on you. Like again, the instrument analogy, I look at this as an improvisation where I have ideas and decades of experience as an architect and making gyms and whatever. But the point is that I want them to start the conversation and we bounce it back and forth, because that's where the answers come from. So my first questions are always goals and mindset stuff, because, you know, is it that you want is your dream to open a 30,000 foot ground up climbing gym, or is your dream to have a climbing gym? Like, and is your dream to open it in the next year or in 4 years? Like these sort of like really big questions that can at the very least, and then we throw some numbers to it, like attach some numbers to these sort of vaguer thought, like timeline or whatever, because very quickly what often happens is that like the dream is not necessarily tied to a specification of size or square footage often. And so usually people have a vision that is unique to them that can probably be executed on a small, medium, and gigantic scale. So sort of which one is appropriate to shoot at now? Like what game are we playing? What ballpark are we playing in? That to me is where you start, because then you can sort of back out all the other pieces. But if we don't know, I mean, for me, it's always intent. Like if we don't know what we're trying to do, then I don't know how to evaluate if we're even doing the right thing.
Yeah, you've heard me say this. I always ask clients, like, who is Chris Ryan's climbing gym and why should anybody care? And like, we've got to start there. What is it that you're trying to do? Because then I can help build, like, what are the operational processes? What kinds of staff org structures do you need? What should your customer experience look like? And too often I think people kind of give me the response of like, we're really going to focus on the climbing experience in the community. And it's like, okay, if I asked 100 climbing gym operators or aspiring climbing gym operators, they would all say that same thing, like, climbing and community. But like, what are you doing differently, and how does that then manifest in the startup costs?
So community. When you say community, that doesn't create a community, right? Like you have to, you create a community. It's like, you don't get to say if you're funny or not. Other people can tell you if you're funny.
Yeah.
Or I'm a nice guy. It's like, you probably aren't a nice guy, actually.
Yeah.
The point is that, by putting things together that attract people and make them want to be there and work well together, and they're sort of situated in my world physically in a way that it's compelling, and you can have your coffee and watch the climbing and do your work, and like that it actually all works and makes people want to get off their couch and actually be there. Guess what happens without trying is the community part.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter how many Instagram posts you have talking about your community, right?
So that's to me how, if I was your client answering that question about like what my climbing gym is, the question I keep asking is like, what else? Like, what else are we trying to do here? Like, yes, we want to do climbing. And I don't mean this in like some novelty garbage way. I mean like in a genuine way. Like, what is this thing to be as sort of potent as possible, so that we can all, anybody listening to this is probably loves climbing and has been doing it for a while, or is just getting into it, whatever it is. There's got to be like a love for it. And that's why I'm not working on, bottling plants or something, is because like, as I care about it, and every client I work with is interested in that too.
Yeah. I think, I would answer that question of like, how do you figure this all out? I think I would say the same thing, which is like, you really have to start with your intent in whatever way that makes sense to you. Do you have a mission or a vision statement? Do you have a set of core values? Do you have, clear goals, timelines, or sort of a vision? That's always where I start with clients as well. And then the number one thing that is related to pre-sale is, you're really going to be in spending mode for 2 years, right? I think the last CWA report said on average from sort of idea to open doors is 24 months or something. And it's like, you're kind of just going to be spending money for 24 months. You're not really going to be making money. So people are hyper focused on the CapEx and the OpEx, right? How many computers am I going to buy? How much square footage of climbing? What type of flooring? Whatever. And all of those myriad of decisions. And then the thing that just gets overlooked is the revenue side. And the thing that just gets overlooked or put way too far on the back burner is like, oh crap, I got to get this thing open. How am I going to make money? And I'm constantly telling people, like, managing operating expenses, managing capital expenditure, that's like standard operating procedure, right? Every good business should be doing that, but that's not ultimately how you're going to make yourself prosperous, right? You're not going to get rich and scale your business because you switched to single ply toilet paper, or you decided to buy the crappiest laptop imaginable for your front desk. Like, that's not what's going to make you prosperous. You have to think about, in my business plan, how am I believably and convincibly going to make this a successful, strategically managed revenue making business
with enough room for like things to kind of go up and down? Like, that's the back of the envelope part of it, right? It's like, it can't be if it's too thin, something's probably wrong, and it's the same to your point about opening. It's the same, again, the restaurant analogy. It's like, you really shouldn't be opening with as a flop, or completely discombobulated. And I definitely see most people just can't keep it together to wait and open. They just got it. They just think like the contractor's done and we open tomorrow. And like, it's just not a great plan. So the more that, to your comment, you can sort of runway and sort of have the discipline to actually do it properly, to like a proper opening, you're just sort of going to, I think, continue the momentum even more and like build that anticipation, which isn't a bad thing, and
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
build that into the sort of schedule, it should be a little bit more predictable and there's nothing to freak out about.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the last comment I would make is you do a great job of thinking through what's the cost of this thing, the physical space, right? And the main components that go in it. And one of the things you've been talking about recently, and I'm seeing it a lot with my clients, is what is the return on that going to be? And I think where you and I have landed is we're talking together and with clients is like bigger is not always necessarily better, right?
100%.
Like, if you want to save money, the number one thing you can flex up and down is your square footage, basically, when it comes to the upfront expenses. And I think the question becomes like, what is enough to get you what you need, right? To get on the ladder, as you said, to get that flywheel spinning, and make sure then that you have the right operating, expense plan on the back end, and marketing and sales plan and customer experience plan to drive the revenue, so that it's not going to take you 25 years to get a return on your initial, 7 figures that you spent on this building.
So yes. And if part of that too, I think, is somewhat being aware of the climbing industry, because the fitness industry, which we're sort of adjacent to, tangent, however you want to look at it, you've got Planet Fitness and you've got like some secret version of Equinox I don't even know about that's way more, right? Dollar, and then who the hell knows how much, So the point is that they can argue you should spend more per square foot, just as a way to generalize, to make a nicer facility. But the business model is there to support it. In climbing, we've seen people try to charge a lot. I know people are doing that in different ways right now. Does it work in certain cases? Maybe, where you should spend a lot more on certain things, like maybe. But if you don't think your business model is there to support it, and that's what gets to the return, or on a size scale, if you let's just make it twice as big. Okay, well, are you going to be able to deal with that, setting routes and just managing all of that? It's not, necessarily like something that sort of just scales up without, like, there's a lot of like on your end, the operation part to just continue to make that good. So the sweet spot 100% is like a real critical thing. It's really a bandwidth, right? Just try to establish that is the goal in the early part, to me.
Yeah, and the return is not exponential on the size. Is that
that's what it shows?
Yeah, it's not like for every doubling you do of the square footage, your revenue doubles. Like, that is certainly not necessarily the case. And your profitability certainly does not follow like a parallel path with the size of your facility, right? Because you can, at some point, you may start losing money depending on what you need to do for staffing and what your leasing expenses are, your mortgage, or, your debt service and all those things. So, well, look, we've probably babbled enough, but I appreciate you taking a little time to just kind of hang out and chat. It's always a pleasure. I think the takeaway for me, and I'd love to share if you kind of have like a TLDR, like I fast forwarded through the last 30 seconds of the video, is like, these things are really expensive to build and open, and they're also not crazy cheap to operate either. But mostly what we're talking about is like opening the things, but also like, don't despair. Like, there is a way that people are doing this everywhere. Like, you can get it done, and there's some key factors to think about, which is don't completely over index on just the first 1 year of your project and how much it's going to cost to build it. Think carefully through what the operations are going to look like, how you're going to launch strong and get your revenue wheel spinning as quickly as possible, and be deliberate about how you spend that first 1 to 2 years of cash. Those would be my takeaways. Do you have any sort of like summary bullets?
Yeah, I mean, just in line with that, I mean, it's totally possible. It's just, what version of it is possible, and
for you,
and are you going to be happy with that? If you're not going to be happy with it, then don't do it. That's fine. But if again, I find more often than not that there's a version that fits the either existing business or new business to be, that will give them something that's like really cool, that they're excited about and passionate about sharing and doing for probably a while, that they can afford, and that they, it's whether or not they get there is a different question, but like bringing it to reality, like that is not, it's not out of reach, really. It really isn't. But you're right. You do have to be really careful. I think especially at the beginning, which is why, that's why I focus on it, because so much of that is setting up the next two steps to document, 10% of the project, say, and build it to 100%. Like these are huge steps. So the more we can get done before the faucet is really on, to me, that's the way to go. And that's the way, frankly, that's the way a lot of developers do it. It's not like we're like, part of what I like about building stuff is that it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
Like people are building stuff all over the place, and some people do it better than others, and we can learn from them. And this is the way a lot of people do it, is like small teams, build the team just like a movie, and then, open it and run it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you and I think take the same approach as well, which is, I would love to say that I'm like some savant genius guru that's like inventing all of these amazing things to help businesses run well. I mean, like really, I'm not. Like I'm learning a lot from like what other people do outside of our industry that is successful and working, and like bringing it to this industry. So I certainly think a good message is like, we don't need to pretend that like we're some crazy unique unicorn industry that like can't learn or take from something that's happening at a skate park or an office building or a hospital being built or a retail store getting spun up. Like there's things that we can take from all of those. And probably the biggest one is just like, start a little slow in the beginning, be deliberate about how you do your business planning and your capital expenditure planning, and like everything else will kind of smooth out.
Yeah, we are truly, I mean, in any I think anybody who's in a creative industry will acknowledge like there's almost no invention. Like really what we're doing is combining things in ways that become unique things, it's all the same matter that we're working with. And so, that it's funny, as I get older, like that's why I'm way less concerned about creativity or like having writer's block, if you will, because, the clients have so much data and so much like inspiration. It's just like, I find that having more sort of, like some of these numbers and things like that, I find actually inspire more creativity than not.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Well, thanks. Thanks for the chat. Maybe we'll do some more of these. Hopefully folks enjoy them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks.